flu, swine flu, pandemic influenza. Who knows? What will they call it next? Draft flu? They keep changing the name, but really we're worried about a 1918 type pandemic. If that should reoccur, we would be in big trouble. Sturgeon said an interesting thing. You cannot stop the birds from flying over your head, but you can keep them from nesting in your hair. And that sort of applies to disease. You know, you can't stop the disease from sweeping the country, but it doesn't have to get you. And in 1918, they had about a 30% attack rate on the flu, meaning 30% of people got it. That means 70% didn't get it. Well, how can I be among the 70%? You know, these pandemics have hit the news ever since bird flu was a popular thing. World Health Organization was issuing all kinds of warnings, and again on the swine flu. They had people dying from the bird flu off and on, and they talked about it a lot. And then we had this swine flu start in Mexico City, where this, well, they called it a unique strain of swine flu, is a suspected killer of many people down in Mexico City, and they followed this thing for a while. We could have more pandemics and pestilences. You know, Psalms 91, the Psalms that many oppressed and hurting people down the ages have quoted, memorized, and repeated back. 3 times in that psalm it mentions either plague or pestilence. And so that psalm is especially important to people who are trying to avoid the pestilence. What about past pandemics? You know, we've had a lot of pandemics down through the ages. There was the Black Plague of the Dark Ages, which probably took out quite a few million people, as many as 50 million people. Cholera has been a plague in some places. Smallpox, which we're pretty sure we wiped out, probably killed 100 million over many, many, many centuries. And then, but nothing has killed as many people in a short amount of time as the 1918 Spanish influenza, which in less than a year killed more than 40 million people. Some estimates up to 50 million. It swept the world, seemingly unstoppable. Within 2 weeks of hitting the United States, it was in China. And it's like, how did it move so fast? What was it doing? But it killed so many people so fast that the average longevity in the United States dropped by 15 years. Instead of people's average lifespan being the 75, it was now 60, because so many young people died. So many people died in that pandemic. Well, we had a 1957 influenza they called Asian flu, and then in 1968 the Hong Kong flu, and then there was sort of this last big scare of the last century, which was it 1974, 76, where they had a Spanish influenza, where they vaccinated everybody and more people got in trouble from the vaccine than from the actual flu. But we've had these things coming down through the ages. What might happen if the Spanish influenza recurred today? That's the question. What would it be like for our community, for our relatives, for us, if this thing came around again? Well, based on a 30% attack rate, meaning 30% of the population in this area would come down with it, what would our numbers look like? Or what would it look like for the United States? For the whole United States, that means about 90 million people would come down with a serious flu. How serious? Well, you know, with the regular flu, you get aches and pains and you don't feel too good, and your temperature goes up, and maybe your eyes turn red and you cough a little bit, and it's miserable, but you survive. The Spanish influenza of 1918 was very, very different. It was a super flu, much, much stronger. And when you started to get the flu, you didn't just hurt a little bit, you hurt a lot. And it hit your lungs. It made it so you could hardly breathe. And you'd start spitting up foamy sputum. And they called the fever that developed, well, they called the shaking you got with the fever the bone-rattling shakes. And within a few hours, you might be so short of breath that you would wonder if you were going to survive or not. Luckily, the swine flu didn't turn out to be like this, but can you imagine 90 million people rushing for their doctor's office to see if a doctor could help them? I mean, this is a third of the world, third of the population of America rushing for the hospital. I mean, this just doesn't, it's just not going to work. And then they figure 1 to 10 million hospitalized and upwards of 2 million people dying. Well, they hope that that would be all that would die. And it would cost billions of dollars. Well, how many people live here in Statesville? What's the population? 50,000? Let's just figure 50,000. Okay, if there's 50,000 people in Statesville, you get 30% of the population coming down with a serious pandemic, and that's 15,000. Well, do we have enough doctors' offices to have 15,000 people knocking on the doctor's office and asking for some help? I doubt it. And then, maybe about, 1,500 desperately needing a hospital with respirators and that kind of thing. Ventilators. Do we have hospitals that will handle 1,500 people in this town and that desperately need a ventilator? See, the logistics behind trying to take care of a pandemic influenza or any kind of plague are just astronomical. You just can't do it. And so in 1918, they made warehouses into hospitals. They put tents out on the lawn. Down in Texas, we had a friend who's a truck driver. He was going down to San Antonio, Texas. He stopped, delivered something to a hospital down there, and they had 3 field hospitals to put out in their parking lots, big tent hospitals, each of which would hold 40 patients. When we were up in Maine, one of the hospitals contracted with a local trucking agency for 4 refrigerated trailer trucks to put dead bodies in when the pandemic influenza came through. How is the flu spread? How are most infectious diseases spread? How does it get from person to person? Well, the way it gets spread around often is through respiratory droplets. A person coughs, it gets in the air, and then the next person breathes it in. And when the next person breathes it in, they come down with the disease. Or you touch a surface that's contaminated, and then you touch your eyes, or your nose, or your mouth, or something, and you just caught the disease yourself. Are masks good? Well, there's different types of masks. This gentleman is wearing a surgical mask. We put those on patients to make sure they don't cough the bug all over the hospital or all over creation. But the type masks that medical people wear when they want to avoid catching an infectious disease, such as strep or meningitis or tuberculosis or pandemic influenza, is what we call the N95 mask. Now, what's N95 mean? It's basically a description of how tightly woven the material is, how small the holes are going through the material. And you can find these at Lowe's or Home Depot or places like that. You'll say N95 on them. Practically speaking, the way it works out in the studies is that if you wear an N95 mask, it filters out about 95% of the viruses that would be in the air. That isn't what N95 means, but that's the way it works out. So they can be helpful. Now, what about vaccinations? Should I get the stick? Should I get the needle? Once a pandemic influenza actually begins, a very bad one, like the 1918 pandemic virus, then you can get a hold of one of those viruses, or a bunch of them, and you can identify them, and then you can start making a vaccine against that bad bug. Well, we really never had a bad bug in this swine flu. It never really turned out bad. The flu it caused was not as bad as a yearly flu, and so they really never had a bug that they could make a vaccine to that was serious. And so all this vaccine stuff was sort of hyped. But in reality, it would take 4 to 6 months to develop a real vaccine based on a real dangerous virus. And so by the time, well, you think in 1918. In 1918, the Spanish influenza started in August or September. It was going pretty strong by September, October. And then it was basically over by the end of the year. Well, it had a brief reoccurrence in a little bit in 1919 and 1920, but nothing like the original time when it just hit everybody really hard. And so by the time you got the vaccine to the real McCoy, the thing would be gone. And so wouldn't be that helpful. And, once they get some of it, then they'd be limiting supplies and deciding who gets it and who doesn't. And how do these shots work in a yearly flu? Well, Canada decided to wipe out the yearly flu. Everybody was going to get a shot. Everybody's going to get a vaccine. Everybody's going to get immunized. They called it the Universal Influenza Immunization Campaign. And everybody was supposed to get a shot. In 15 years of doing this, they saw absolutely no reduction in the incidence of the yearly flu. It made no difference. So, we have to talk about other things that will help you to have a better immune system than just getting a shot. What about drugs? Well, there's a lot of different drugs on the market, and these bugs become drug resistant in a hurry. And even in China, they've shown that these antivirals are ineffective when they had the bird flu going around and the swine flu. So we can't always depend on the drugs. What do they do then? They put everybody in quarantine. This has been pretty effective. This is taking people who might be infected and keeping them separate from others who aren't infected. And it can apply to a whole region, or it can apply just to a little area. And as of, 2005, they had all the roads mapped out in all the counties across the United States, and everybody was online to where at the command of the CDC, they could have every county isolated. They'd put up roadblocks on critical roadways, and you'd have the whole country stalemated overnight. Well, what would that look like if I waited for 6 weeks for a pandemic to blow over? How much food do you have in your home? How much food is in your supermarket? At any one time in the United States, there's about 3 days' supply of food. The rest of it's still on the way in the boat coming from Chile or wherever. And if they shut down the country for 6 weeks, there'd be a lot of people wishing they had some food set by. And, that's a whole other issue, but it could be a very big issue if you ran out of food. When the pandemic starts, then quarantine everybody doesn't make a lot of sense. Then they start working on what they call social distancing. This comes from the studies they've done on school children in Chicago or prisons out in California, where they discovered that if they kept a certain distance between individuals, then communicable diseases, pandemic diseases, didn't jump from person to person so often. And that critical distance turned out to be about 6 feet. So in the prisons, if they kept the cots at least 6 feet apart, or in the schoolroom, if they kept grade school children at least 6 feet apart, then they weren't likely to catch things that were pandemic at the time, or endemic, or epidemic, like meningitis, or the flu, or things like that. So the social distancing has value. What about cities and disease? Pandemics didn't make their way into recorded history until cities reached a critical size. That critical size was 250,000. When the city gets that big, then a virus can come in one side of the city, and it'll get this neighborhood sick, and then that neighborhood will pass it on to the next one, and it'll just keep going around the city to neighborhood to neighborhood to neighborhood and come back around to the original neighborhood. By then, it has made some genetic changes, usually for the worse, and then that neighborhood gets it again, and it goes around again. And it's interesting what Jeremiah says. I will smite the inhabitants of the city, both man and beast. They shall die of a great pestilence. Not that that's particularly predictive of anything in our day and age, but it is something to consider that pandemics are compared to city life. Cities aren't necessarily the most healthful place to live. There's a lot of toxins in the air, a lot of things that can get you, a lot of vehicles running around. Luke 21, 10, 11, and 27. Talks about this. Then said he unto them, Nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and great earthquakes shall be in divers places. We've been seeing some earthquakes recently, haven't we? Haiti and Chile. But there's a lot of earthquakes happening in a lot of places, more frequently than in the past. Famines. And famines often can follow another natural disaster like an earthquake. And then pestilences often follow famines because when people are malnourished, their immune system's down and they're more likely to catch something. Fearful sights and great signs shall there be from heaven. And a few verses later, then shall he see the Son of Man coming. So we know that part of the end time picture is increasing diseases. And as we run out of drugs to treat infectious diseases, as they become resistant to all the antibiotics, then we might have to rely on other things like natural remedies and keeping your immune system up. This was the subject of a discussion between Lord Palmerston of England and the Scottish clergy. When Lord Palmerston of England was petitioned by the Scottish clergy to appoint a day of fasting and prayer to avert the cholera, he replied, in effect, "Cleanse and disinfect your streets and houses, promote cleanliness and health among the poor, and see that they are plentifully supplied with good food and raiment, and employ right sanitary measures generally, and you will have no occasion to fast or pray." And then he added something that might not have made them very happy, but nonetheless he said it. "Nor will the Lord hear your prayers while these his preventatives remain unheeded." Makes you think that maybe he was having a hard time getting people to follow his instructions there in Scotland. But it is true. We have to take care of ourselves. And the better shape we're in, the better our immune systems, then the less likely we will be to come down with one of these diseases. So we need to talk about an ounce of prevention. Isn't it true that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure? That's right. And so let's talk about prevention. So let's look at the immune system and how it responds to an infectious disease. And in this case, we're looking at influenza. Here's time across the bottom, and up here is the number of viruses. We want to look at what happens over time. If you get infected down here at time 0, then the first thing that happens is the virus goes into a cell. He starts reproducing himself and producing thousands upon thousands of viruses. The growth is exponential. You get one virus into a cell and maybe 20,000 viruses back out of the cell. The virus takes over the cell and makes the cell into a virus factory. So as the viruses increase, then the next thing that happens is your immune system wakes up. Wow, what's going on here? Something's happening. I got to do something. And the way the immune system responds first is with interferon and natural killer cells. Natural killer cells are white cells, one of the white cells in your body. And those natural killer cells will start reducing the number of viruses along with interferon, which is your natural antiviral. Now, notice I stopped it here about halfway. You want it to go all the way down to nothing in order to survive this thing. If the next part of your immune system is not intact, then the number will start increasing again and you'll die. The next part of your immune system that has to be intact to fight any viral disease, be it Spanish influenza, be it cancer, which is also often viruses, as we'll talk about tomorrow. Then you need your B cells, which are more white cells, lymphocytes, and your IgA, antibodies A, immunoglobulin A. You need those intact. And then you can wipe out a Spanish influenza or a yearly flu or cancer for that matter. You need to have those two parts of your immune system working very well. So we need to look at what it takes to make those parts of your immune system work well so you can fight pestilences. So we're going to look at the 8 natural doctors, as we call them, the 8 natural remedies, and how they boost your immune system to produce more interferon, to stimulate the natural killer cells, to get the B cells working, and get your IgA up. We'll look at pure air, sunlight, abstemiousness, which is temperance, rest, exercise, proper diet, use of water, and trust in God, trust in divine power. Let's start out with pure air. Pure air is especially important. You know, we just came from California in February. And the people in California no longer have to breathe by faith. They can see what they breathe. Lots of smog. And if you have lots of smog, you're in trouble. And the smog will wipe out your lungs. But if you can get out in fresh air, which you have more of out here, then it helps your lungs, especially if you get out in the morning when there's still dew on the ground, or you get near a body of water like a river, lake, or stream. Then there's more negative ions in the air. And those negative ions boost your immune system. They make you more healthy. And so these negative ions will actually make the natural killer cells work better, be more energetic. And when you get extra air like that, the negative ions destroy some of these viruses in the air. They're kind of like an antiviral themselves. Well, what do I do if I live indoors all the time? Well, you're in trouble because indoor air is much more polluted. Outdoor air that's polluted makes it so you'll have more pneumonias and influenza. They did a study on office workers, people who were going to have an office remodeled. The office was old, and they decided to make it new. So they decided to make a study out of it. They checked the people's blood before they remodeled the office, and then they checked it afterwards. They were checking the natural killer cells, and they were checking for all kinds of, chemicals. So then they took and remodeled the office. They put new carpet on the floor, new plastic desks and chairs and upholstery and bookcases and filing cabinets. Especially dangerous was they put a lot of new insulation board in the walls. And then, at 2 weeks and 6 months, they tested these people for chemicals. They found they had high levels of formaldehyde. Formaldehyde's in carpet. Formaldehyde's in these insulation boards in the wall. And they discovered that their natural killer cells were not functioning well. Do you remember the FEMA trailers? All those trailers that had too many chemicals and people were getting sick? Wiping out their immune system. What do? I mean, my house is full of brand new carpet. Well, you need to get fresh air in your house. And if you open the windows in your house and change the air once in your house, you will reduce the amount of toxins and microbes by 60%. You change the air twice, you reduce it by 90%. In the operating room, when we're doing total hips and total knees, we try to change the air in the operating room 10 to 15 times per hour to keep it pure and clean and good so you won't have infections. Another thing that wipes out your immune system is molds. This will cause autoimmune diseases. Mold will wipe out your immune system. Mold exposure in water-damaged buildings like New Orleans reduces natural killer cell activity and initiates inflammation. Living in a home with mold increases problems with respiratory tract infections. You're more likely to die or catch an influenza or a pneumonia living in a house where there's mold or living in an area where there's mold. On the other hand, there's things that are good for your air outdoors. Pine trees. Pine trees contain all kinds of essential oils and so forth. They're very good for you. There is health in the fragrance of the pine and the cedar and the fir. And there are several other kinds of trees that have medicinal properties that are health promoting. Studies of pine show that the extracts from pine cones actually suppress the growth of influenza viruses in cells. And so getting out and walking among the pines is very healthy. Some people use pine oil as an essential oil in the house to help reduce the number of viruses in the air. They often use it along with citrus, which also has been shown to reduce viruses in the air. And so it's a good thing for freshening your air. How about sunlight? What's the vitamin you get from sunlight? D. Yes, vitamin D. Exposure to sunlight 1 hour a day for 12 days significantly increases circulating immune cells for up to 2 weeks after the end of the experiment. People who get out in the sun have more vitamin D. On the other hand, children, recent study just came out within the last 2 months, where they looked at children and their vitamin D levels, and those that were low in vitamin D had more respiratory tract infections. So vitamin D is very important. In fact, So much so that we're wondering, we call this yearly cold we get a cold. Why do we call it a cold? Well, because it's cold outside. We're learning that it really has nothing to do with the temperature of the air. Maybe, in fact, the real reason they're getting the cold is because they're low on vitamin D. So maybe we should call it, instead of a cold, we should call it a hypovitaminosis D. So when you get sick next time, don't tell them you have a cold. Say, I have a hypovitaminosis D. Vitamin D prevents excessive expression of inflammatory cytokines. What's that mean? If you have plenty of vitamin D, your lungs are less likely to go into meltdown. What can cause that meltdown? The flu can. SARS virus can do it. All those strange viruses we've had over Ebola? Is it? Yeah. Ebola can do that. The Black Plague can do that too. There's a number of viruses out there. Dengue, a second attack of dengue fever from South America will do that too. There's a lot of infectious diseases that will do that same thing to your lungs. So if you have plenty of vitamin D, then your lungs don't melt down so bad. Vitamin D stimulates natural killer cells, especially in the respiratory tract. So you want to make sure you get your sunlight. A lot of these infectious diseases are sort of like a thief. A thief that knows where to come in your house and turn off the alarm. And what this virus does is when it gets in your body, it turns off the body's ability to produce interferon. And interferon's the antiviral, so it just stopped the alarm system. And so this is a big problem. But on the other hand, if you're getting plenty of sunlight makes it so the virus can't do that to you. And so getting out and getting sun is part of surviving a plague or a flu or an infectious disease. People who get more sun survive cancer better. Now let's talk about temperance or abstemiousness. We think about that as staying away from things like smoking. People who smoke have 1.5 times higher risk of catching a flu. And smokers miss 70% more work because of the flu. They're off longer when they get sick. More likely to get sick, and they'll be off longer. That's because what smoking does to your lungs. It just paralyzes those cilia cells and makes the lungs more likely to catch an infectious disease. Alcohol, same thing. It tends to poison the white cells, the natural killer cells, making them so they aren't functioning as well. And so it's immunosuppressive. And when you mix alcohol and tobacco, the effect is multiplied, not just added, it's multiplied. So whereas maybe small amounts of either one, which may not in and of themselves be so dangerous, when put together, make it very dangerous, wipes out the natural killer cells. Let's talk about rest. Rest! How about rest? Does it help? People who don't get their rest are in trouble. People who have insomnia get more flus and pneumonias and this kind of thing. More infectious diseases. Their immune system is not functioning as well. You need sleep to help your immune system. One of the big reasons is because in the middle of the night, if you sleep well, you get melatonin. How many have heard of melatonin? Yes, melatonin is an important anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory hormone that your body produces about 3 a.m. if you got some good sleep before midnight. If you have insomnia, you're in trouble. Now, they did studies on rats. They put them in 3 groups. One group was the control group. The next group got a vaccination. And the third group got a vaccination, but they made them miss 7 hours of sleep one night. Then they gave all 3 groups influenza virus. Of course, the control group, they got sick with the flu. The group that had been vaccinated, very few of them got sick with the flu. But the ones who had been vaccinated but they missed their sleep, they caught the flu as though they had never been vaccinated. So you might get a vaccine that was going to help you, but if you don't take care of yourself, then it's useless. And on the other hand, if you do take care of yourself, maybe you can avoid the need for all that vaccination. You want to make sure you take good care of yourself. Exercise is part of that. In one study, people who exercised moderately, emphasis on moderately, had fewer respiratory tract infections. Why do I emphasize moderately? Well, if you tell a crowd of people that if they exercise, their immune system will be better, the type A personalities will go out and join the club to learn to run a marathon. And that doesn't help your immune system. That actually wipes your immune system out. I had a classmate from medical school who started doing that, running marathons. And he started getting more and more colds because overexerting yourself or competing wipes out the immune system. Well, let's talk about proper diet now for boosting the immune system. An apple a day keeps the doctor away. Does it work? Is it true? Well, we'll find out here. There are a few things that will bring the doctor running. One of those is eating cholesterol. Cholesterol tends to wipe out the immune system. It depresses natural killer cell function to 1/4 the usual activity. 1/4. Wow, 1/4. Well, now you watch. I'll tell you how to boost it 4 times. So, stay tuned. And it'll reduce natural killer cell activity and interferon production. So cholesterol isn't real helpful. Any type of fat, for that matter. The more fat you get in your diet, the less your natural killer cells will be functioning. And if you're getting a large amount of fat, high-fat diet, like 40% of your calories coming from fat, then your natural killer cells are reduced by about 80%. So that's hard on the immune system. Milk wipes out the immune system. People who drink milk end up with more respiratory tract infections, and drinking milk will triple your incidence of cancer. Study from T. Colin Campbell, who did the China study. What about sugar? Will sugar help your immune system? No. And here's a little graph that helps illustrate that from a study done out in California, where if you ate no sugar, 0 teaspoons, in a 12-hour period, then each white cell in your body could consume about 14 bacteria, bad bacteria, such as E. coli or Staph aureus or Streptococcus or something. And so if you eat no sugar, you're in good shape. If you ate 12 teaspoons of sugar, what's a common food with 12 teaspoons of sugar? Some cereals. 1 soda. 1 soda has about 12 teaspoons of sugar. So 1 soda or sugary cereal will reduce your immune system so that each white cell can only consume 5.5 bacteria. You just wiped out 60% of your immune system. What about if you drink 2 sodas? Then each white cell can only consume 1 bad bacteria. So sugar really wipes your immune system out. So you're more likely to catch an infectious disease. So you don't want to be eating refined sugars. Now, there are some things that will really, really boost your immune system. Fresh fruits and vegetables, high in antioxidants, high in vitamins, high in phytochemicals, full of good nutrition. We call it nutrient-dense food. When you eat lots of fresh fruits and vegetables, it boosts your immune system. It makes it so you're less likely to get an allergic reaction. It's tumor protective. It reduces inflammation. I have a friend, George. I went to school with George. Actually, George was one of the, what we call a assistant dean. And he decided during my academy experience to go on a fresh fruit and vegetable diet. That's all he ate. And while the rest of us were eating our cooked food, he would have a big bowl of salad. You can imagine how we teased that guy. We called him the gopher. But he had some good comebacks. He took it well. Well, I talked to him not long ago, and I said, "Hey, George, how you doing?" We got caught up on the news, and then I asked him, "Are you still on that, fresh fruit and vegetable diet?" And he said, "Well, yes, I sure am." I said, "How's that going?" He said, "Well, in the last 25 years, I've never missed a day of work due to having a cold or the flu. I've never been sick in the last 25 years. I found that pretty interesting. He said, "Before that, when I was still, eating cooked food and eggs and cheese and milk and so forth, I had a flu or a cold every winter, and I was always sick." Fresh fruits and vegetables stimulate the immune system, make it so you're less likely to get one of these flus. So let's talk about good food. Why is a plant-based diet helpful? Well, vegetarians have significantly higher intakes of antioxidants than omnivores. It's because that's where it comes from. It's from fruits and vegetables. So they have about 3 times as much vitamin C, vitamin E, and vitamin A coming into their bodies. And they have lots of good minerals. Everybody might be a little low on selenium, especially in the Carolinas. It's not in the soil out here. So we'll talk about where you can get your selenium. But let's get back to that. Now the apple. Is it true? If you eat an apple a day, does it keep the doctor away? Well, when it comes to flu, it actually does. 5 or more apples per week actually improve your lung function. People who eat an apple a day actually take a bigger breath of air with every breath. And the apples contain phytochemicals which have been shown to inhibit influenza viruses. Viruses. So this is like, virus birth control. The viruses are not reproducing themselves. And so apples are very good in that regard. I was up in Maine giving this talk, and one gentleman came up to me afterward and he says, I used to eat an apple a day, and I never had the flu in the 4 years I was doing that. Then somebody gave me a box of oranges, so then I ate an orange a day. I got a flu that year. It's nothing wrong with oranges, but the oranges just don't have that phytochemical in them that help prevent the flu. The oranges have vitamin C, though, that help you deal with illness. Now, garlic. Did we talk about social distancing? This is something to help with social distancing. In one study, they took a bunch of people who lived close together. They had a farming community out in Israel. They called it kibbutz. And that's where everybody kind of lives communally. And they gave half the people in this closed society garlic supplement pills. And the other half didn't get them. The half that got the garlic supplement pills had 63% less colds and flus that year than the ones who didn't get the supplements. So garlic is very good at helping you fight an influenza. Onions are similarly helpful. When you eat an onion, it's almost instantly on your breath. Have you noticed that? And it's because it goes right to your lungs. Onions are very good as a cough syrup. They will help your lungs in that way. It's helpful for somebody who's having trouble with asthma. The onions contain a phytochemical which is called quercetin. It protects against inflammation in the lungs, so the lungs won't melt down so badly. And it's also found in apples and green leafy vegetables, this quercetin. So it's a good phytochemical in these vegetables. Grapes contain a phytochemical, resveratrol. This is what's actually responsible for reducing heart disease in people who drink red wine. It's also in grape juice, and it's also in the grapes. And it's mostly in the skins of the grapes. And so this phytochemical strongly inhibits replication of influenza viruses within cells, and it improves the survival of mice who have been infected with influenza. So if you're looking for something to boost your immune system, we're giving you all the good foods here, things that fight viruses, things that get your immune system going. How about white bread? No. I see some heads shaking. Well, I just put white bread up there as sort of a symbol for that which is without nutrition. A diet which has only 50% of the necessary vitamins, according to the USRDA, significantly suppresses your immune system. If you're malnourished, you're more likely to get sick. That's why pestilence often follows famine. And it's very interesting that the Bible puts them in that order. And so pestilence follows famine. On the other hand, making sure you have plenty of vitamins. So let's look at these vitamins. For example, folic acid. Folic acid is an important vitamin. You don't want to be low on folic acid. People who are low on folic acid have been shown to have reduced white cell counts, reduced natural killer cell activity. And so you want to make sure you have plenty of this. Where should I get it? Well, they did some studies on a group of people who were deficient in folic or folic acid, which is the same thing. And they found out that the people who were deficient had their immune systems down. So they took one group of them and they fed them good food, full of folic acid. Their immune system picked up. Then another group, they fed folic acid pills. Their immune system picked up, but not quite as much, but it did pick up. Then they said, hey, let's combine the two. So they gave another group both folic acid and gave them good food, and their immune system got worse than if they had done nothing. You see, not always are these pills that great for you. And the pills are not the preferred way for your body to get good nutrition. And we'll talk a little more about that as we get to other vitamins. But how much folic acid do you need? Well, about 400 micrograms. Where would I find it? Well, let's see. Arrowroot is often sort of a, what would you say, a thickener you can buy in the store. I've seen it in regular supermarkets in the spice section. Wheat germ, peanuts, sunflower seeds. You'll see a lot of nuts and seeds here. Spinach, lentils, pinto beans, parsley. Let's see, none in corn oil, none in potato chips. None. Well, why do I mention stuff that has none? Well, if you're eating a food that's totally deficient in some vitamin that you need, then your body's going to take from its own stores just to survive, and pretty soon you totally deplete your stores and you become deficient. And then you run into the symptoms of deficiency, one of which is an immune system that's down. How about vitamin A? Vitamin A deficiency reduces the amount of natural killer cells that are functioning. It also reduces that IgA we talked about. So you don't want to be low on vitamin A. Well, where do I get vitamin A? Well, carrots is a good place. Should I take vitamin A pills? You know, the studies on vitamin A pills have shown that vitamin A pills are actually dangerous. If you smoke, you know you'll have a risk of cancer. But if you smoke and you take vitamin A pills, then your risk of cancer goes up another 10%. Well, if you look at the carrot, there's 273 different active forms of vitamin A, carotenoids and carotenes and retinols and so forth. If you take a vitamin A pill, then there's just one type, usually beta-carotene. So you're deficient in all those other types that you would get from the carrot. And if you eat raw carrots, you get more vitamin A in your bloodstream than if you eat cooked carrots. Now, where's a good source of this vitamin A? Well, let's see. Paprika. Wow, who wants 100 grams of paprika? That'd be quite a lot of paprika, but it looks like you'd only need about 10 grams because all you need is 5,000 units for a day. Cayenne pepper, well, that'll cure a cold. Sweet potato, carrots, kale, spinach. A lot of good sources of vitamin A. Now, how about vitamin E? Vitamin E pills tend to increase your risk of cancer also. You want to get your vitamin E from natural sources, and you need it in the case of fighting infectious diseases because it reduces viruses. It also makes it so the virus doesn't turn off your brain. Did you know viruses turn off your brain? When you get the flu, do you want to go to bed? You feel tired? It's because the flu changed your brain so it's functioning on alpha waves, sleep waves. Why does it do that? Because your brain controls your immune system. The left side of your brain actually controls the immune system so much that if you have a stroke on the left side of your brain, your immune system goes down. Well, if the flu can make your immune system go down by changing the brain into sleep waves, it's accomplished the same thing. But if you have plenty of vitamin E, then the flu can't do that to you as well. So you don't want to be low on vitamin E. What's more, vitamin E keeps your lungs from melting down. Where do I get my vitamin E? How much do I need? About 30 international units. Sunflower seeds, almonds, flax oil, wheat germ, nuts and seeds again, olive oil, pine nuts, peanut butter, cloves. You can see there's a lot of sources here of vitamin E. How about vitamin C? How much do you need? Megadoses? 1,000 milligrams? 10,000 milligrams? 20,000 milligrams? No, you really need 60. You really only need 60 milligrams, which seems like not a lot, doesn't it? Given the fact that it's hard to find a pill that's less than 500 milligrams. And so you don't need an awful lot. Strawberries have plenty, and strawberries help fight the flu too. Bell peppers, chives, red cabbage, broccoli. Well, look at how much is in broccoli. Notice there's more vitamin C in broccoli and red cabbage than there is in lemons. Can you imagine? Lemons are good though too, and kale and so forth. Let's talk about selenium. I said that people could be short in selenium, particularly in this part of the country. You know, people in the Carolinas, in Virginia, and in Georgia don't live as long as people in Nebraska. And they think it's largely due to the fact that there's a lot less selenium here, and there's a lot of it in Nebraska. Soybeans grown in Nebraska will have more selenium than soybeans grown in Alabama. Alabama's also low on selenium. And so you don't want to be low on selenium. In fact, they found if people are low on it and they start giving them selenium, their immune system will pick up. And what selenium does for you is it keeps your lungs from melting down. It protects the lung tissues from getting damaged by the flu virus, and it makes the lung tissues recover more quickly. So, you're wondering why that flu took so long to get rid of? You might be low on selenium. Where can I get selenium? Well, should I get it from happy pills? No, that doesn't turn out to be a good way. In fact, people taking happy pills like that end up with more diabetes and stuff like that. What you really want is to take it naturally. How much do I need? 70 micrograms. Where can I get it? Well, look at the top one there. Brazil nuts. Brazil nuts are the biggest source. And you only need 1 or 2 of them a day to get a full day's supply of selenium. So we keep a few Brazil nuts around. So now, so far we got, an apple a day and a garlic a day, and now some Brazil nuts a day. You can just, get your shopping list out here and be prepared. So, plenty of Brazil nuts. Oh, what kind of diet have we been talking about? It's the original diet, isn't it? The in the beginning diet, the Genesis diet. Genesis 1:29, then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food, and you'll eat Snickers bars. Oh, no. No, oh, wait, okay. And you'll eat the plants of the field. God knew what to feed us to keep us healthy, didn't He? Yes. All right. Well, now I told you, when I mentioned that cholesterol wipes out your immune system down to 1/4 its normal activity, I told you what would boost it to 4 times. Here it is. 60% caloric restriction. A diet that is 60% with 60% less calories will increase the natural killer cell numbers 4 times and their activity 2-fold. So not only are there 4 times as many soldiers, they're twice as energetic. How's that for a prescription? Just eating less food. You know, people who eat less food live longer. People who eat less food have less cancer. People, in America we eat about twice too much food. Really? In Okinawa, they eat a lot less. They eat 40% fewer calories than Americans. They have 80% less prostate and breast cancer. How about water? How important is the use of water? I practiced last at Parkview Adventist Medical Center up in Maine. And they had a big problem. People who work in the hospital know what the hospital can do for them, all the tests. So they're always running to the doctor and they want that test. And so they're kind of expensive to insure. They utilize the insurance too much. And so the CEO of the hospital was, what are we going to do? So he went and talked to the wellness department. And the wellness nurse said, well, let's try something. Let's put water in all the break rooms. And so that's what they did. And so every Thursday morning, the central supply manager would come around pushing a pallet truck and offload packages, all kinds of crates and crates of bottled water. It cost the hospital $25,000 to keep water in the break rooms that year. But it reduced the utilization of insurance by the employees of the hospital by $240,000. And it did that year after year after year. When people drink water, they're more healthy. Men who drink at least 5 glasses of water a day have 50% fewer heart attacks, 50% fewer fatal heart attacks. When you drink more water, it boosts your immune system. When you drink water, you're more likely to survive a number of diseases. We learn this from nursing homes where people often get dehydrated and then they have more constipation, urinary tract infections, respiratory tract infections, flus and colds and so forth. They end up with electrolyte imbalances and renal failure, that's kidney failure, and all kinds of problems just because they're dehydrated. Most Americans are dehydrated. Most Americans could stand to drink more water. How many glasses of water should you drink a day? A minimum of 8. But water isn't there just to drink. It's also good for bathing. Most persons would receive benefit from a cool or tepid bath. Oh, thank you. Yes, but I'll have a warm bath, please. Oh, no. You want your bath cold or at least cool or tepid. And if you do that every day, morning or evening, instead of increasing the liability to take cold, a bath properly taken fortifies against cold. They did a study up on military recruits in Alaska. They decided to put them in a cold bath, 64 degrees. Kept them there a while, and then let them get out, sent them out on a bivouac, and found out if they gave them a cold bath before they went out on their march, they were much less likely to get sick. They're much less likely to come down with a disease. It stimulated their white blood cells, and it increased the activity of their natural killer cells. A cool bath is helpful. Also, just ending your shower with cold for a minute will stimulate your immune system. That's what I do. If I feel like I'm coming down with a flu, a cold, or something, I head to the shower. And when I go to the shower, I start out with hot. And I put it as hot as I can stand until I feel my temperature go up a little bit. Oh, how do you tell that? Well, first couple times I did it, I stuck a thermometer in my mouth so I could know that that's what was going on. But you get a distinct feeling as your temperature goes up. And it's sort of uncomfortable, like you're getting the flu worse. Anyway, so then after I got my temperature to go up a little bit, then I went and switched over to cold. And yes, it was very, very cold. This was up in Maine. Then I leave it on cold for 1 minute, then go back to hot as I can stand it, until I feel my temperature go up a little bit. And then, once it's done that, go back to cold again, and then go lay down for a half hour. What this does for me is it raises my white count. In fact, if you look at some of the studies, like out of Mayo Clinic, when they did this to patients, they raised their white count to 4 times normal, 40,000. And so these white cells then go through the body, helping fight infections that boost your immune system. And anytime I've done this, when I thought I was coming down with a flu, a cold, or something like that, and I caught it just at the onset, by the next day I was well. Everybody else who might have been coming down with it was not well. They went on to have their 5-day flu. Another thing that's helpful is charcoal. How many of you use charcoal? A few of you. Charcoal can be bought on the internet, charcoalremedies.com. You can make your own. Just take a hot coal out of your hot stove and drop it in a bucket of water and cool it off and grind it down. You'll have charcoal. You can buy charcoal tablets and charcoal capsules at a lot of health food stores and some pharmacies. Anyway, charcoal binds viruses. It actually absorbs them on its surface so they can't get away. And it also absorbs inflammatory things going through your body. And it reduces inflammation. And so it's very helpful. If I think I'm coming down with the flu, that's the other thing I do. A couple tablespoons of charcoal in a pint of water inside of a jar. I shake it up good with the lid on and drink it down. And this is very helpful at fighting viruses. Let's talk about trusting in divine power. Before I do that, though, I said we'd kind of do this in the context of the Spanish influenza. But at our home church that we were at in California for the last few months, one of the ladies' husbands came in and he said, "Oh, my wife has the shingles." And she's had the shingles now for 2.5 months. And they're not getting better, and she's just hurting all the time. And shingles is a herpes zoster's manifestation on your skin that really hurts. How many know what shingles is? Some of you do, yeah. And it hurts and it burns, and little bubbles might come up in the skin or something. And she was just having a time of it, and he wanted to know what he should do. And I said, "Well, here, Here's a copy of my talk on boosting your immune system for Spanish influenza. Just take it home, have her do everything in that, and see how it works. 2 weeks later, she came to church. She came and shook my hand, thanked me profusely how she had gotten over her herpes zoster because she had boosted her immune system following the stuff in this talk. Let's talk about trust in divine power. In the literature, they call it religiosity or spirituality. When they measure it based on their own criteria, they've shown that people who are more religious or spiritual have better immune systems. Their immune systems function better. When they look at respiratory tract infections and stress, an outcome of perhaps not letting God take your stress, they found that people under more stress have immune cells that aren't functioning as well. Their natural killer cell activity decreases and their levels of IgA go down. And the more stress they have, the more respiratory tract infections they get. So stress is a huge part of this. In fact, 5 minutes of anger significantly reduce IgA levels for up to 5 hours. Oh, doesn't that just make you angry? Well, yeah, I wish my IgA levels wouldn't go down. Now, if you trust in God, one of the things you do is you live to help others. That's part of the commission of Christ. Do unto others as I have done unto you. Live a life in helping others. And when you do this, the benefit is there. Mortality in one study was significantly reduced for individuals who provided support to friends, relatives, neighbors, and their spouse. On the other hand, just receiving support did absolutely nothing to reduce mortality. So, you got to get in there and help other people. It is more blessed to give than to receive. You are helped by helping others. Well, in summary, the sanitary precautions, masks, washing hands, social distancing, are there to reduce your exposure to the number of viruses. That's important. It takes a certain number of viruses to get you sick. One won't do it. Different viruses take a different number. For example, hepatitis B takes about 200 viruses to get you sick. AIDS takes several thousand. The influenza takes a certain number. Sanitary measures are to reduce the number you get exposed to below that critical number. Be prepared in case of national shortages of essential supplies and services, in case they shut the place down. Maybe have 3 months of food on hand, huh? And then vaccines and antivirals may be in limited supply and of limited efficacy. They may not have it for you, or you get the shot, it may not be for the bug you're going to get attacked by. And the pill, it might be, the bug might be immune to the pill, resistant. Do all you can to boost your immune system by eating a nutritious diet. And make sure you get a good variety, including plenty of fresh fruits and vegetables, beans, nuts, seeds, and whole grain products. Avoid excess salt, sugar, alcohol, cholesterol, and saturated fat. Practice good habits of drinking lots of water, exercising on a regular basis, out in the open air and sunlight, and get plenty of rest. Well, as the Healthcare Inspectorate of the Netherlands said, the only thing more difficult than planning would be explaining why